The problem with the gut biome is twofold. One is we don't really feed our bacteria sufficiently, and we don't have the diversity anymore, because a lot of people tend to eat the same things all the time. So you feed the same families of bacteria all the time. So you don't bring in the variety. Plus, on top of that, we're killing a lot of bacteria, whether it's with antibiotics, which clearly have a good benefit if it needs to be for a throat infection, but you're killing at the same time those families in the gut.
Welcome back to Brave New World, the Standards podcast where we explore the cutting edge of science, medicine, and the future of humankind. I'm your host, Evgeny Lebedev, and in this series we're venturing into the realms of neuroscience, longevity, consciousness, and the extraordinary breakthroughs reshaping the human experience. Today, my guest is Dr. Sabine Donnai, a consulting physician, world authority, and leading thinker in proactive health management. She specializes in genomic medicine and works with advanced brain imaging and biological data to better understand long-term health. In this episode, we'll explore the work she's done in her Malibon clinic, Viavi, where I've undergone a lot of different tests, and discuss how small practical adjustments can help us all live better, healthier lives. Dr. Sabine Donnai, a huge welcome to Brave New World. It's a great honor to have you as a guest. And I first learned about you when I read Tim Spector's article in the Times. He's been a guest on this program before, and he was very surprised to find that despite all his healthy living, he was heading towards a neurodegenerative disease, and that caught my attention. So that was a very well placed article, and since then we've met and we've carried out some investigations on my brain. But first of all, I'd love you to just tell readers, viewers, listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, and about your organization, Viavi.
Yes, well, thanks for having me here, Evgeny. Thank you very much. I'm a doctor, as you know, and I specialize in what I call precision medicine. So our aim is to really give people a strategy on their health. And for obvious reasons, the brain becomes very crucial in that whole area of whether we think of healthy longevity or just preventive healthcare. Originally, I'm from Belgium, and I qualified as a general doctor, a physician. However, I got very frustrated with medicine, thinking after 7 years of study, I kind of knew it all, and I felt really that I missed this massive part, as in how do we stay healthy. I had learned about symptoms and matching that with a diagnosis and matching that with a treatment, which was either medication or surgery. What I really had not learned about was really understanding what would keep people healthy, which was, for me, more of a fascinating area than trying to backtrack health. So I'd gone on this long journey throughout the world, literally, to try to find out what actually constitutes of good health and how can we support people with a personalized strategy to really make the most of their lives for as long as possible.
Where did you go?
I worked in Africa. I worked in South Africa for many years. I worked in Australia with the Aborigines for many years. Then I studied acupuncture and homeopathy in Sri Lanka and went to India for Ayurveda. So really tried to understand the ancient ways of treating, because they did not have medication, neither surgery, as in what did they do to really support good health.
Is there a common thread you found in all of them?
Yeah, very much so. The most common thread was actually, strangely enough, was not, herbals and things like that for sure. What I found super interesting was when I worked in South Africa with the Sangomas, the witch doctors, they used to treat, for example, a frozen shoulder. They used to make little cuts on their knee in a particular area for a frozen shoulder, which at that time didn't make sense to me. But then when I went to study acupuncture, they used the same place for the acupuncture needles for frozen shoulders, and I said, oh my gosh, okay, they had nothing to do with each other. But the most common trend was definitely the ability to create what I now call a parasympathetic state, as in calmness within the system to heal. And that is something that in our current way of treating medicine, we have seemed to have forgotten completely.
Yeah, that's true. But it's even in the new frontier of longevity and preventative medicine and longevity and even rate reversal, that is not very present either.
No. I mean, the problem with the gut, of course, has come with our current lifestyles. I mean, what they had 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, they didn't have gut problems because they were eating from the nature. They had a lot of fiber because they didn't really, just most of the foods were still eaten raw, other than the meats. But their fruit, their vegetables was full of fiber, was not broken down they were eating now. They didn't clearly have no foods that were processed as the vast majority of our foods now are, of course. So the gut biome was way, way healthier. I mean, they've done research on gut biomes on mummies that they still found some bacteria there. And it's the diversity has got no comparison with our gut biome now. Even in the good biomes that we're having to date, has got no comparisons with the variety that existed tens and tens of thousands of years ago.
Why is that?
Because our foods have become a lot more... The variety is not there, and we don't feed the problem with the gut biome is twofold. One is we don't really feed our bacteria sufficiently, and we don't have the diversity anymore, because a lot of people tend to eat the same things all the time. So you feed the same families of bacteria all the time. So you don't bring in the variety. Plus, on top of that, we're killing a lot of bacteria, whether it's with antibiotics, which clearly have a good benefit if it needs to be for a throat infection, but you're killing at the same time those families in the gut. On top of that, the environmental toxins, the kind of water we're drinking, the heavy metals that we're in contact with, the molds that we're in contact with, all that actually has an influence on our bacteria. So the variety is far reduced, and the vast majority of people have a biome that is completely inefficient.
Well, antibiotics, particularly in this country, I find that given out too liberally. You have anything, cough is antibiotics, you have running nose has antibiotics.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we don't tend to check anymore whether you actually have a bacterial infection that requires an antibiotic, because not all bacterial infections require an antibiotic in the first place. But as you say, I mean, it's the easiest thing to do. Somebody's poorly, I'm not going to take a risk. Okay, it might just be bacterial, let me just prescribe an antibiotic. And then over and above resistance that we have created already, the bigger problem almost is that we've destroyed our gut biomes.
Could be viral though.
Yes, exactly.
So, and then on your life's journey?
Oh, my life journey. Then so after all my travels, I finally felt and said, fine, prevention is where it sits, and I have got a really good understanding. So eventually I ended up in the UK, thinking this was the hub of where really innovation can happen, and where...
Used to be.
Exactly, okay, but so I felt like I'll settle here because that's where my skill set would be appreciated. I worked for Bupa first, okay, because they had a big screening centre and really made some progress there, but felt quite frustrated with the innovation I could bring in because it's a very big organisation. It couldn't really move forward very fast. But anyway, went through those journeys, set up an own business, which then was sold into Nuffield Proactive Health, and was a medical director there for about 5-6 years, leading the national screening services and many thousands of clinicians. When I decided to set up Viavi about 17 years ago, when I felt there's a need for somebody that actually delivers something that is highly personalized, very precise, without having to really worry about any kind of limitations on both the type of investigations I can do and the type of advice I can give to people. In those days, nobody spoke about biome and longevity, and there were words that were not really used in the medical world. So it was either going to be, it was going to work, or I was just going to fail. And we just took the chance. And thankfully, after 17 years, we're still here and growing strong. And now the world has woken up to the word longevity and preventive healthcare, which is very helpful now for ourselves.
So would you say those are the three areas that you specialize in, the longevity, biome and brain? with preventative as the
the underlying focus. Yeah. Exactly. So it is all about identifying what the right strategy is for your health. I mean, it is more precision than prevention, I would say. I mean, prevention automatically comes into that. I mean, it's almost the consequence of being precise. What I've learned throughout my experience in life, seeing many thousands of people, is that there is not one size fits all. And I got very frustrated with the screening world, as in people tended to go and say, I'm going to have my MOT next month, so I better get myself in shape because otherwise I'm going to be told off. And I say, well, it just doesn't make sense, that mentality. I mean, you're doing that for me as a clinician, you're doing this for yourself. So how can I somehow change that mindset that you're saying, actually, that prevention should almost be in your general strategy? You're doing it with your car. I mean, I often use the analogy and say, if I would give you a car, any car, you can choose any car in the world, Evgeny, okay, but you're only ever going to get one in your life. Okay, you will choose a very nice car, but what you're going to do, you're going to really take care of it because you're only going to get one in your life. And I think we should treat our body exactly the same way. I only have one. So, and yet we still don't have that mentality. The vast majority of people don't have the mentality as in, and I need to take care of it. So what I specialize in is trying to educate people, as in there's so much you can do that is in your hands to try to stay well, because nobody wants to be poorly. Then you start backtracking all the time. You waste time, energy, and often it's got a bad ending. So what I specialize in is create that awareness and actually help people give that strategy that actually helps them actually avoid as much as possible, as we know, okay, the nasties in life.
Does it work? I mean, does it work changing the mentality? Because I find it's very hard for people to change, even unless someone gets seriously sick. It's very hard to teach people.
I think data helps. I think you're seeing black and white and say, oh, this is what's happening, and that makes sense. So intelligent people will grab that most of the times with both hands and say, well, fine, there's a number that needs to change, and this is why. Does it change in habit? Is that difficult? And most people don't want to do that? Absolutely. Okay, it's the most difficult thing, because we all get into a routine in life that somehow feels comfortable, and that we somehow just want to make a compromise. I mean, we all I drive a car. The likelihood I'm going to have a car crash is higher than if I don't drive a car. But I wear a seatbelt, and I'll try to buy a car that is safer than an old car that might not have good brakes. So, and I think we need to do the same with our health. And say, is life still a compromise? Yes, it is. Do I live the perfect lifestyle? No, I don't at all. But do I know which compromises I'm kind of okay with? Yes, and that's where the data helps me. That I'm saying, okay, that I live by the 80-20 rule. I say 80% of the times I'm doing the right thing for me because I enjoy the energy. I enjoy that I'm not aging faster than I should. I enjoy that my cognition is as sharp as it was 20, 30 years ago. So I enjoy that because I enjoy living life to the full. But 20% of the time, I'm just saying, oh, you know, what the heck, Sabine? Okay, you just have some fun, just go for it. And I do. But I know where I can do that and where the impact might be. So I know how to compensate for it. And that, to me, makes all the difference.
It is very complicated, because it is very complicated to gauge where that is. It's very complicated for anyone who's just trying to understand and navigate all the assault of information that's coming from different directions, because a lot of people who are promoting this kind of lifestyle are very, very strict and abstinent from everything, which I think puts a lot of people who are interested in this off completely, because they don't want to live like that.
No. And as I said, it would put me off. I don't want to live in a straitjacket and continuously feel guilty because I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, because that's the worst. I'm saying, oh gosh, I can't have this and I can't do that and I should be doing this and I have not been there. And that just causes more stress. And I often have this problem with the biohackers, because the amount of stress that that they put on their system to try to do the right thing all the time actually is more detrimental than actually doing your 80-20 kind of rule. Because stress steals energy away from whatever your weak link is genetically and epigenetically. So the last thing you want is adding more stress to it.
There's actually now a psychological condition, or I can't recall the name of it, but there's a one that is related to longevity, to wanting to live long, and the stress it puts one under. And there's some very high-end clinics that are specializing in patients in that. So
because it becomes an obsession, and any obsession is unhealthy. So it is about, I think to me, Evgeny, it's about really understanding who you are and what, as I mentioned, what your weak links are, and therefore what kind of things are going to make the biggest difference. It's like you would run a business, okay? You're really trying to say that investment is going to give me a really good return, okay? And that's what I want to do with health as well, and say, what is going to be the biggest return on my investment? Mm-hmm. So I want to do something that I'm saying, okay, I'm prepared to spend maybe 15 minutes a day, or 20 minutes, or an hour a day, whatever time I've got, but I want that to pay off, because otherwise I'd rather do something else. And as long as I know what to do, and that's what precision medicine is about, and say what for you is going to make all the difference.
So should we talk a little bit about what we did today, some of the results, some of the tests you've done on me and the results, and how that can translate to our listeners and to the wider public?
I mean, we did a lot of tests.
We did. And I have to say, even for me, who has a vague understanding, it was quite complicated.
It is complicated, and in all fairness, and because you do have an understanding, we went into probably a bit more science than we would normally go into, because I wanted you to understand exactly how it all fitted together. Mm-hmm. But
and that was really interesting, by the way.
In simple terms, what we looked at was, in particular, we focused on your brain health, because it is the area that somehow remarkably is the least looked at when you go for an assessment. When you can go for total body scans and they will say, yes, your brain looks fine. And of course, what they're looking at is the structure of your brain. So if you'd be dead and you'd have the same scan, your brain would look exactly the same. So, okay, the scan is only really going to show perhaps a tumor or a malformation or something like that, but it's not going to show how well your brain is functioning, nor at what risk it is for cognitive decline in years to come, or emotional problems or mental problems or anything like that. So what we did is we really look at your brain from all different possible angles. And what I mean with that is, yes, of course we do the scans, as you've seen, but more importantly, we're looking at everything that we know of can possibly harm your brain. Mm-hmm. And is there anything that is out of range and is influencing that already or not? And then we look at everything that is supporting your brain. And is that in the right levels to actually allow that brain to stay as young as possible for as long as possible? And for you, if I may,
yes.
Okay, what we found is that there was quite a lot of toxicity going on in the brain, both from environmental toxins and from a neurohormonal point of view. Mm-hmm. And we found a very clear link with that, with your gut biome, but particularly your intestinal permeability.
So should we just start with the toxicity?
Yes.
And also the neurohormones.
Sure.
And then go to the gut. So the toxicity, when you talk about toxicity, do you talk about everything, including pollutants, heavy metals, or? So
when we talk about your total toxic burden. Mm-hmm. Because toxicity on its own, you could have a very high microplastic level, mm-hmm. but your volatile environmental toxins might be perfectly normal. Mm-hmm. And then your own detoxification, which we all have, thankfully, would be able to cope with that. Mm-hmm. The problem with toxicity that we mainly find now is that total burden, that bioaccumulation of all the different toxins really starts overburdening our system. Mm-hmm. And definitely in people that might have a compromised detoxification system genetically will be impacted so much more.
Which I do.
Which unfortunately you do. So what we're seeing with you is...
Because we also did a genetic test.
We also did a genetic test, because the genetics is going to give us an idea as in where would your vulnerabilities lie genetically.
Yeah.
And then it allows us to look deeper into that particular area just to see is there an impact already or not. And what we saw with you, yes, genetically you're compromised with the MTHFR gene, but on top of that, throughout the years, you have accumulated quite a lot of toxins. And the ones that we found in particular were a lot of mycotoxins, the molds. We found PFAS.
And that could come from...
Come from anything from... mycotoxins come a lot from water. Comes a lot from water damage if you live in old buildings. The water supply in the pipes in old buildings, definitely. But a lot of grains. Grains tend to be harvested and then they're all put together in some sort of recipients where they would just store them before they go to manufacturing. And what happens is the mold starts growing on them. So very seldom do we see a grain without mold. Coffee has got mold on it. So in the same way, they just really start growing as they after the harvest. So we're seeing a lot of mold in your brain. We've seen we haven't measured the mold in your brain. We have measured the immune reactions against the mold in your blood.
Can you measure the mold in the brain?
In the brain itself. Well, if you would do a biopsy, but you don't want to go that far. That's why I corrected myself. We haven't measured the mold in your brain. We measured the immune reaction in your blood against the mold in your brain. But we also have found some microplastics in the mains, good for you, not the ones you actually ingesting, so you're clearly very careful with that already, but the ones you inhale. And those are the ones that are more difficult to avoid because they're surrounded with it. Okay,
there's been a study recently, which I'm sure you've seen, that in the last couple of weeks, I had a lot of publicity about claim that potentially the danger or the harm of microplastics has been over exaggerated. And the two things they said there, one is that they're not as harmful potentially, and two, that a lot of testing that is done in a contaminated way, so a lot of tests can come back. No,
I've read the study, okay, but I've also read the study from the New England University in New Mexico, who did a trial they looked at about 400 different brains. Half of them were from 2016 and half of them 2024 of people that had deceased. They used the same method for both. So there might have been contamination, there might not have been contamination, but they used exactly the same method for both. And the amount of microplastics that they found with an 8-year difference, 2016-2024, doubled in the 2024 ones. So that is not contamination, because that is purely as in there is more plastics that were found in the brains in people that actually were 8 years older than the ones in 2016. There's no doubt that microplastics cause inflammation. They have found microplastics in carotid arteries in plaque and found that they're about just over 40% more likely to rupture with those microplastics in there. So, it's only logical that you would think something so foreign to our system that our immune system is going to react to that. You don't need to be a scientist to understand that. I think where the problem comes in, and I think where some scientists highlighted it, is that is microplastics alone such a problem that we really should all be saying, oh my gosh, okay, what is happening? And I tend to agree with that. It is, and that's why I mentioned earlier, it is the combination of factors. It is if you have microplastics and on top of you have PFAS, and then you have your heavy metals, and then you have your volatiles and your pesticides. And if that totality of your burden is so high, there's only that much that your system can cope with.
Well, should we touch on the other ones? Should we touch on the heavy metals?
Yes. So
did we do the volatiles? And
yes, we did, and we found some pesticides in your blood as well. Ones that actually have are now banned in the UK and have been banned in the 1970s. It's not because it's banned that it's out of the soil. So it will be in the soil and remains in the soil for many, many more years. So we find it in rainwater and things like that. So there's still a circulation going on of herbicides and pesticides that have been banned a long time ago, and we still find them now. So that we find, okay, you clearly have been in contact with it. The problem with you in the main is the combination of factors. So you have a bit of PFAS there, not dramatically high, I must say. I mean, your levels were about just over 5.
Will you explain, please, Sabine, what PFAS?
Oh, PFAS, they're called forever chemicals. And why they're called forever chemicals is because their half-life, so the ability to get rid of half of them, is normally anything between 20 and 30 years. So they stay around for a very long time. So it's only after 20 to 30 years that half of it is gone, and then half takes another 20 to, so it stays forever in a day. And they've been researched quite a lot for the impact on the environment. And it's only really recently, in the last 10 years, that we've been looking and what is the impact on human health. Because if they're so prevalent in the environment, how does it impact us? And they really came into the medical world quite significantly with a TEFL. You must have heard of that, okay, and the impact on health. So any PFAS you find in the main with anything that is either waterproof or stain-proof or superglide or fireproof, fire-resistant, so anything like that, it has got PFAS in them. So your raincoat will have that. The lining of your coffee cup will have that. I mean, it's impossible to stay away from forever chemicals. I mean, they're absolutely everywhere. The fish will have them. I mean, it's just, as I said, it's impossible to stay away from them. So the only thing what we can do, other than just being completely petrified on what's happening, is trying to avoid as much as possible within our environment the impact on PFAS on oneself. So if you say, am I going to take some popcorn in a popcorn bag? No, because it's completely lined with PFAS, okay? The inside of your pizza box will have PFAS. So things that, as long as you have an awareness, you can start avoiding.
So how do you not lose your mind trying to avoid all these things, to avoid microplastics and the PFAS and the pesticides and the
I think it's an illusion to think we can avoid it.
But to even touch the sides of reducing the amounts of, because it's everywhere, isn't it?
It's everywhere.
It's absolutely everywhere. So how do you can't go completely insane trying to...
No, that's what I'm saying. You can't live in a straitjacket and just saying, oh, I'll find, okay, in what world... I think we have to come to understand that this is the world we've created, and hopefully over the coming years, scientists will be there and say, well, can I find alternatives that are more natural? And slowly they're going to be phased out, and I'm pretty sure that will happen. Whether it's over the next 10 years, over the next 50 years. But I think there's some easy wins.
What are the basic things people can do, apart from what you said already?
Yeah, but then the easy wins for plastic would be don't put warm food in plastic and then eat it. Okay, so don't put plastic in your microwave. Be aware when you drink from plastic bottles, because you might take it out of the fridge and say it hasn't been heated, but it would have been in a truck on the way to the supermarket, and that would have been. So there's some really easy wins. So it is about an awareness. Don't use a non-stick pan, okay, and definitely not when it's scratched. I mean, there are some brands that are safe, and they make very big publicity around it and say it's safe, there's no PFAS on there. So in the main, you can actually really check things, and anything that has got fluoro on it, okay, you can kind of just probably think that there's a PFAS that is associated with it. But you can't live in fear on, say, I'm not going to wear my rain jacket. I mean, I wear a rain jacket, and I know that there's PFAS on it, but I know that overall there's a lot of other toxins I can start avoiding. And I have a water filter at home, in all fairness. And
what's a good water filter?
I use a reverse osmosis filter. And what that does, that actually they take away, it cleans the water completely. Anything from hormones to PFAS to plastics to environmentals, as in your pesticides and your herbicides, to clean the water. It also takes the minerals out of it. It just cleans it entirely. So you want it remineralized, otherwise you're going to be lacking minerals. But that helps because there's a lot of environmental toxins in water. I have an air cleaner at home, okay, although I live in the countryside, but the countryside, there's spraying that goes on. So at least when I sleep, I know that I'm breathing clean air. I don't use kind of carpets that have been stain-resistant sprayed. And I don't use any chemicals at home for cleaning or anything like that. So, I mean, in the main, when you go to a supermarket, you can find those cleaning products that say it's good for the environment, in the main, the ones that are good for the environment are good for you as well.
Okay, that's good advice.
So those are choices you can make. So and that really reduces quite a significant load. So you can actually reduce your own load with a good 50% if you just have some awareness without having to do something extreme.
So we talked about PFAS, we talked about the environmental pollutants and heavy metals. I particularly have high arsenic.
Yes.
So we were talking about that could come from
rice. Yeah, can come from rice, can come from water, again, grains. The vast majority of heavy metals we take in through food. Some of them we're breathing in. I mean, I want to say something else actually on the toxins. I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, we have got a good detoxification system that is naturally in us. So to actually support your gut, and that's where the gut comes in again. So there are certain bacteria that love eating toxins, okay? And they might just, if you have a lot of fiber in your diet, okay, and your gut moves nicely, you will actually start pulling out those plastics very easily. So we see people that actually have a very good biome and regular bowel motions and eat a lot of soluble fiber, their plastic levels really go down quite significantly. Heavy metals you can sweat out. Okay, so you go into the sauna, okay, and you will sweat out your heavy metals. PFAS, that's the more difficult one because those are the ones that kind of get stuck a bit more. But the vast majority of toxins, you with a good gut function, drinking clean water and have a good renal function, and once in a while going to something like a sauna or even exercises when you're sweating out, you're actually releasing a lot of toxins. So there's a lot we can do without just saying, oh, well, fine, I actually just need to avoid everything that I'm touching, because that doesn't become practical.
Definitely not. Well, I was happy to see that despite the fact that when I was a child, I thought it was a good idea to bite off a mercury thermometer. That my mercury,
yeah, you mentioned that.
My mercury level has gone down.
Yes.
But of course, unless you eat a mercury thermometer or you have a amalgam filling, the other way of getting high mercury would be fish.
Fish, yeah, the big fish. So tuna in particular, swordfish. Okay, so those are the fishes that you really would like to avoid in the main, sadly. Because they're full of mercury. The big fish eat the medium fish eat the small fish, and it's just that accumulates in that big fish. That's really what happens. Whilst we're seeing the opposite for microplastics, actually. We find it more in the small fish. So it is in your mussels and your oysters, and your small fish have more microplastics than the big fish. But heavy metals and particularly mercury, you find more in the big fish. So yeah, when we measure mercury, we kind of and we haven't done that test for you because your mercury was normal. But if we would find a high mercury, what we do, we check and say, is it organic or inorganic mercury that in the main is actually that you accumulating? Because the one you kind of excrete through the kidneys, the other one's through the hair. So it depends on which kind of mercury you're mainly in contact with, on what the strategy would be to eliminate it.
Mr. Gary Brecker, who's another guest on the show, calls the motherfucker gene. What is it? What does it do or not do if you have it? Yeah. And then what are the ways to mitigate?
Yeah, so he's talking about a gene which we nicely call the MTHFR gene.
That's the one.
So it's a gene that is involved in your methylation. And methylation is, in layman's terms, is your ability to actually repair your DNA if you want. And that's important because damaged DNA will put you at a high risk of problems, okay, such as cancer, for example. So it's a gene that you rather don't have a mutation in, but a lot of people do have. Now, it is important to understand there's very, very few illnesses that rely on one gene alone. So you have many, as I've showed you. Okay, your MTHFR gene was one out of about 62 genes that we looked at for your methylation ability. So it's an important gene, but it's definitely not the only gene. So again, very much as when we talked about our environmental toxins, from a genetic point of view, you want to look at the totality of your ability to detoxify. Not for you, unfortunately. You've got quite a few genes that are actually compromised in that area. So you do want to support it. And a good support is really thinking from a practical point of view on greens. So you want to eat as many dark green vegetables as you can. The problem with the dark green vegetables is they are in the main heavily sprayed. So you have your spinach and your broccoli and your kales, and they're often heavily sprayed. So you definitely want them organic. But if you can't buy them organic, what I find is very useful to take away the environmental toxins is just to soak them for about 10 minutes in some bicarbonate water. Okay, and that really just seems to be releasing the environmental toxins quite nicely. So why the greens are good is because they contain a lot of folate, and folate influences homocysteine. You might have heard about that. And you want your homocysteine levels to really be nice and low. So you want it between 7 and 10, whilst most people have very high homocysteine levels.
And that can affect your heart health.
And well, not just heart health, because it affects your methylation. It affects heart health, brain health a lot. I mean, there's a lot of trials that have actually come out that say it could be almost that managing homocysteine alone could reduce your risk of cognitive decline quite significantly. So it's a very important, and it's a strange thing because in a normal blood count, okay, it doesn't seem to be looked at. So you have to ask for it specifically, but it's a very important molecule to actually check for.
And taking folate or getting folate from food is purely to manage homocysteine.
Yes, but it's the homocysteine which is a crucial co-factor to actually start methylating. So without it, you're kind of almost stuck. So once your homocysteine is fine, you're going to stimulate your methylation, which is brilliant.
So what would your advice be for me?
Oh, for you, the sequence of events needs to be, because what we found is that you have the leaky gut, and the leaky gut then partially is influenced by your toxicity, but will aggravate the toxicity. What happens is that the leaky gut then influences the toxicity influences your neurohormones and can cause anything from anxiety to potential other problems later on. The problem with that then is that it's also influencing your mitochondria, as we found, and you're not producing sufficient ATP, which is your currency of energy. Which you're not aware from yet, which is brilliant. I mean, your oxidation is working well, so everything is going well. However, your energy is being shifted to dealing with your toxicity rather than producing pure energy within the mitochondria. So your mitochondria are a little bit in hibernation for the moment.
So should we speak about this in step by step and quite as simple as possible? So you start with the gut.
The biggest problem with the gut is that it's leaking. So what happens as it leaks is that your immune system starts reacting to that. Now, in particular, the liposaccharides, which is what we found antibodies against, which is this tight junction protein that is being compromised for you, has got a big influence on your microglia in your brain, which are your immune cells in your brain. So your immune cells in your brain starts reacting to that, which suddenly then gives you an autoimmune reaction in your brain. If you have an autoimmune reaction in your brain, that starts compromising what we call your blood-brain barrier, which is a protective barrier of the brain. So once that is compromised, whatever heavy metals you have in your blood and whatever other toxins now start influencing your brain. So you get more inflammation in your brain, which then has this virtuous circle. Your brain starts reacting to that by producing more hormones that are alert hormones, if you want, because they feel they've been attacked with these heavy metals and the blood-brain barrier that is compromised and your microglial cells that have been activated. So you suddenly have these neurohormones that put you on high alert all the time. Now that then because there's a connection between the brain and the gut, which is called the vagal nerve, so that high alert hormones in the brain sends that message back to the gut, who starts reacting to it because it's that everything is on high alert, which then the circle starts going again. And unfortunately, the side effect of it all is that your mitochondria, which are your cells that produce energy, start suffering. And which eventually becomes the biggest problem, because the moment you start producing less energy, everything else gets less support. And that then puts the fire underneath everything that is going wrong.
Yeah.
So the only thing we would, it sounds perhaps like, oh my gosh, a lot is going wrong. And it is purely because you're seeing the cascade of events. Nothing's going wrong. Okay, you're super healthy, everything is absolutely fine. However, to actually maintain that health, we're going to have to start having a plan that actually starts supporting it in the right order. Otherwise, you can understand if you're not producing enough energy and the hormones are going wrong, eventually you're going to pay a price.
So what do we do next? What's the way to fix this? Or not fix it, but stop it from falling into disrepair? Particularly the mitochondria, which as far as I understand, these bacteria that live inside our cells that basically produce our energy, in effect.
But they're not bacteria.
Are they not? I thought they were.
No.
I thought they were exogenous bacteria. They're not actually.
Yeah, there's definitely a theory that originally there was a bacteria that got into your cell, and then that eventually, when we became one-cell organisms and then became multi-cell organisms. So they think that originally it was a bacteria that was in there, but it's not a physical bacteria now. No. So it's what we call an organelle. Mm-hmm. So it's an organism that probably, not centuries, but millennia ago, once was a bacteria, but it's not now. So what a mitochondrium does, it's physically a little battery that actually produces energy, which we call ATP. Mm-hmm. And for obvious reasons, they're very important. Our brain has got about 20% of our energy production in our system. So it needs that support of the mitochondria. All the axons in our brain, they're just lined with mitochondria because our brain uses so much energy. So the moment your mitochondria are compromised, often the very first feeling is going to be in the brain. And often people describe it, I've got brain fog, or when I need to do something complicated, okay, it's just, they don't have a brain problem, they don't have a cognitive problem, but they can just feel like sometimes sustained concentration becomes more difficult. Mm-hmm. And that is purely because that energy, that continuous energy supply on high demand is just not there anymore. So very seldom I find that people actually have those symptoms of, and they won't probably even say the symptom. It's probably more often when we just need to probe it and say, do you feel that, okay, when you need to concentrate? And often the people say, well, of course, because I'm busy and I'm tired or this and whatever. People find an excuse for it. But that's what often makes us look for, is there a problem with the mitochondria? Because mm-hmm. it is often a first symptom if you know what to look for.
So what do I do?
What do you do? It's going to be a sequence of events mm-hmm. that we discussed, okay? Because the easiest and probably most common reaction would be and say, oh, I've got a lot of toxins, let me detoxify. Okay, so, and detoxification can either be quite gentle or can be extreme. Okay, and anything in between. So you can have an oral detoxification, you could have a detoxification through a lifestyle, so that would be the first one. Then you have oral detoxification, then you can have infusions of detoxification, or you can go through a plasma exchange or a plasma purification, okay, which, and in that kind of sequence. So that would be your perhaps more natural reaction and say, let me get rid of those toxins, because as you've seen, they influence every step along the way. But it's actually the last thing you need to do. Because the moment you detoxify, what you're actually achieving is clearing out your blood in the first instance, which might sound good, but the purpose of cleaning out the blood is you releasing out of your tissue, mm-hmm. where eventually you want it gone. But by doing that, you're putting a lot of strain on the system. Mm-hmm. And already we've seen that your mitochondria can't really work well on the strain. Mm-hmm. So you're going to make the problem worse. Okay, you're going to cause a stronger inflammatory response because you won't be able to detoxify it easily. And you're going to have that cascade of event, which is going to make things worse. So that's the last thing we're going to be doing is detoxifying. And we're going to start first with actually supporting your gut. So unless we actually support that leaky gut, which causes that inflammatory response because suddenly there are particles that are normally meant to be held within the gut are going through the gut mm-hmm. lining and actually come within your system. And quite rightly, your immune system starts reacting to that, which is that first cascade of events. So unless we start healing the gut first, which is not just looking at your microbiome, which will take part of it, but will be more so in actually lining the gut.
And what causes leaky gut? I know we don't know for sure, but...
Two things will cause that, most likely. One is the inflammatory response you've had on things like toxins, okay, in the gut itself, but most likely you've eaten foods that you would be intolerant to. And that could be the milk, it could be gluten, which are very highly...
Well, I'm definitely intolerant to dairy, and despite that, I used to religiously have it.
Yeah, I mean, they're highly inflammatory foods. A lot of people actually are aware that they're reacting to the foods, but it's so much part of our diet that it's easily ignored. And say, oh, fine, how am I going to have a coffee without milk? Or how am I going to live without cheese? Or definitely bread. I mean, they're such a staple within our diet that it's difficult to imagine that you could do without it. So a lot of people ignore perhaps a symptom that they might feel a bit more sluggish, or they might have a bit more brain fog, or their energy goes down, or they might have a stomach that is not quite right, or they will have minor symptoms, but sufficiently for us to get alerted as clinicians, but for them not sufficient to actually start saying, I need to avoid this, I feel sick, because they won't feel sick. It's not like an allergy that you're saying, I'll just break out in a rash or can't breathe. But there's no doubt that they're inflammatory foods, both of them, and gluten and dairy. So our advice normally would be, if you can, just avoid them.
And a lot of people would say, well, humanity has been consuming that for centuries. So what's happened? Why has it suddenly become inflammatory?
Well, first of all, gluten was not a natural food. It is something we started cultivating. It's not something that just started growing within nature. We started cultivating
quite a while ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. So, and what happens is that if any food that you eat on a regular basis, too much of, your system starts reacting to it. Any food. So if you would be eating something super healthy, blueberries, okay, but you're eating them on a daily basis in good quantities, eventually you're going to get an immune reaction to it. So ideally you'd be eating like 100 different foods a week. And often people say it to me and say, well, God, Sabine, I mean, it's just impossible. How am I going to eat 100 different foods a week? I mean, that doesn't exist. And the way I address it, I tend to think a lot with spices and herbs. So one day I will cook Italian, and then I'll cook Lebanese, and then I'll cook, Mexican. And then you use completely different spices and different herbs. And that becomes then quite easy, actually, for me to actually say I have got that wide variety. And it does two things. A, it avoids me from becoming intolerant to any one food. I mean, I do avoid dairy and gluten, but that's beside the point. So
are you saying that if you, throughout your life, if people didn't consistently eat dairy and gluten, they wouldn't become intolerant to it?
Less likely. Less likely. I mean, they're not natural foods to eat for a human. And I would say probably a good 60, if not 65% of people, because we check it genetically, are actually intolerant to it already. So we know genetically already the vast majority of people are intolerant. And the others, because they're eating it on such a regular basis, okay, become intolerant. As I said, you can become intolerant to healthy foods as well. So try to vary your diet, which is the first thing, if you can't stay off it. And dairy is easier to avoid, I find, than gluten, because gluten-free bread tastes a bit like cardboard, I find. So it's not worth eating.
Sometimes. So we talked about leaky gut, and then what next? You said the way to do it, to fix it, is
starting with your leaky gut. Exactly. There will be some nutrient support in there, obviously. Then once your leaky gut is kind of supported, then we kind of move on and say, well, fine, what kind of nutrients are you lacking to support your imbalances of your neurohormones? That'll be both nutrients, and they'll be both as in trying to change your environment as much as possible, and the external influences on your nervous system. But also, as we discussed, things like if you could include something like meditation, something that actually brings calm within the system. Because as I remember when we first started this discussion, you say, what are the two things I've learned from those ancient medicines? And there were two. One is they had a healthier gut, and two, that always brought in calm into their system. And it's not a surprise that it's almost the first two things you're going to have to do to actually start repairing.
Yeah.
So once we've done that, then we start thinking as in how can we start supporting your mitochondria? And then once and only once your mitochondria have been supported and repaired, and we've measured that they have been repaired, we start thinking of detoxification. And then you're going to be super duper.
So ready for the journey.
Exactly.
But how do we, I can't help fearing that where we started before, we might create the same situation by getting people scared and running a mile from all this because they think, oh, this is just
too complicated,
too crazy. And I'm not, just like so many of the pioneers of longevity, they're making it sound like it's completely out of my reach. So how do we narrow it down to someone who's really interested and just getting interested in this and doesn't really have time or the money, frankly, to devote?
Yeah, and I totally agree.
Pretty much full time to this.
And we've had the opportunity to look at an enormous amount of data and very specialized data, actually, to be able to unravel things. For me, it allows me to actually give you a very simple strategy. And you will see when you get a report, we won't be saying, first we need to do this because of that, and secondly, whatever, because that is probably not very much of interest to you. You just want to know, tell me what I need to do, and that actually I'm going to be fine, my brain is going to be fine for the rest of my life, okay? And I can just decrease my brain age with about 15 years because that's what you want to aim for. So the only thing what you really want to know is that, well, practically, how complicated is this going to be? And it really is not going to be. So people that can't afford, okay, the variety of tests, okay, or don't have a clinician that can actually explain it to them or understand this complexity. And that's not a criticism. It is purely what we specialize in, and not everybody is. Then start with the gut, always. Okay, unless your gut is right, okay, and that should be the simplest thing to do, because it is about how you eat. If you have gut symptoms, if you feel bloated, if you have irregular stools, then you know something is just not right. I mean, there's plenty of gut biome tests out there that you can check, but the simple truth is eat any foods that are highly processed. Avoid samey foods all the time, and eat like a Mediterranean, a DASH type of diet, and eat live foods. I mean, just bring bacteria back in. And I far prefer to do this through live foods than through probiotics. So, I mean, whether you make your own kefir or you buy some kefir, or whether it's kombucha, or whether it's kimchi, or whether it's sauerkraut, I mean, the variety is out there now. I mean, 20 years ago, people would have found it a lot more difficult to find it in a supermarket, but now you can, or it's easy to make at home even. Yeah. So that's where you need to start with. I mean, get that richness in your gut. And then sometimes I feel people must be tired now and say, oh, there they go again, it's about the gut. But it's important. It is about the gut. Because unless you're going to get your gut right, you're not going to get your nutrients in. If you can't get your nutrients in, you can't produce your energy. And I don't want to do the science talk again, but that's really the simple truth. And say, get your gut right, because it is the basics of getting healthy. And we find this often even why now we're seeing children getting a lot more eczema and asthma and autoimmune disease. We're seeing a lot more than we did 50 and 100 years ago, purely because we're seeing a lot more children being born by cesarean section. So they're already born with no gut biome, because a natural birth is physically putting a child's face through a vagina, which is clearly not sterile. And by cesarean section, there's only sterility that goes out, and that child actually is born without a gut biome. So you can already see the compromise that has happened for those children.
But interestingly, also a lot of parents are very protective of children touching things, touching the ground, touching and just things in the park, and that creates...
Yes, you need dirt.
Yes.
You need dirt, because you just need to build it up. I mean, if I see, because I've been in contact with so many different viruses throughout my life as a doctor, the likelihood that I get a viral infection I mean, I see everybody else in the office just going down with the viruses all the time. And just to me, because my immune system's been stimulated, it just knows what to look for. And that's exactly what happens when indeed your children need to be crawling around and they need to put things in their mouth. And that's just a natural way of building your immune system and your biome. So back to basics. How do we get there? We need to start with the gut biome, okay? And it is not as in, is everybody on the gut biome? It is the most important thing to get started with. Whether you're thinking of heart health, brain health, immune health, it's absolutely where it starts. Unless that is right, there will be something upstream that is going to go wrong. So, is that complicated? No. That is actually very simple. That is about eating a variety of foods, eating clean foods as much as possible, making sure you get live bacteria in your meals every day, and bring a variety. Don't drink the same kombucha every day from the same brand because you're going to get the same bacteria all the time. So bring that variety in there. And that's where it starts. And once you get your gut right, the likelihood that other things are going to start falling into place is the more likely scenario. Sometimes you need a bit of help on the one side and a bit of help on the other side. Even if we would do nothing else for you but get your gut right, you're going to be fine. It might take 4 years, but you will be fine. I mean, we'd like to achieve that for you in 6 months, but do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the cascade of events in reverse will start happening because you will detoxify much better. Your mitochondria will be more supported because you'll get more nutrients in. Do you see what I mean? Yep. So it is actually not complex. I've got it complex because I wanted to explain the science to you. But actually, you can just almost break it down and say, well, why should I even bother having those tests? Like, I'm just going to look after my gut.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Is there anything that mothers who have given birth through a cesarean can do to compensate for the lack of...
Yes, yeah. I mean... If they've given birth already, okay, it is about ensuring that you bring the biome into the child, okay, so and that is then it's going to have to be with probiotics or with live foods, as we've discussed, even for children. However, what we tend to advise women that choose to have a cesarean, or if they need an emergency cesarean and we have a chance to speak to them, is just prior to the delivery, they actually put a swab in the vagina. And as soon as baby's born, you physically put the swab over the face. Okay, so the baby just then, as they start breathing and inhaling, they actually get all those bacteria. I mean, it sounds gross, but
it makes total sense.
Yeah, it's just a natural way of getting that biome in. And we're somehow bypassing that completely.
So how would you've narrowed down and you've very clearly made the point that biome gut is the most important thing and everything stems from that literally. But how would you do the same for the brain, for the other focus of your work and also in context of what you've just said, looking back, how it was done?
The way I see it is that our whole body is just there to actually support our brain. That's really what it's there for, whether our kidneys detoxify, whether our liver detoxifies, whether our biome actually produces the hormones and the nutrients and all that. I mean, our cardiovascular system is there to support our brain. So the best way to look after your brain is to look after your body, because the brain on its own can't exist. It can only exist by actually supporting that. So the most harmful thing for your brain, in a way, is sugar. Because sugar causes enormous inflammatory response in the brain. I mean, the brain lives on glucose, strangely enough.
Sugar, yeah.
Okay, but it's the sugar spikes that I'm talking about. So each time when you have a sugar spike, you have that insulin that needs to go down to try to control the sugar. And what happens that each time that happens, you have an inflammatory response. And inflammation is what you really want to avoid in the brain. And when I talk about inflammation, I'm talking about a cellular inflammation, not inflammation in your joints per se. So if we think what causes that inflammation, it is indeed whether it's sugars, whether it's cholesterol. I mean, cardiovascular system is super important for the brain. But then so are social connections. Okay, I mean, if we think of brain health, we really need to look at it as a totality. And I do come back to what I've said earlier, is that if we think back as in how people used to live, even not even 10,000 years ago, if you just even think 300 years ago, there was a lot more social connections. People ate together. There were people where they ate healthier foods. Processed food didn't exist in those days. We had cleaner water in the main, and there were no toxins around. So if we want to support our brain, bring calm in your life, bring joy in your life, make sure your gut is working well, and make sure you actually do some cardiovascular fitness, as well as weights training. It is just everything that looks after your system. Without a healthy cardiovascular system, you can't get the blood supply to your brain. We started this discussion talking about Tim Spector and the article you saw. And he's been very open about it, so I could clearly talk about it. But there was nothing as in risk of Alzheimer's or anything like that. It was pure vascular. And actually we're seeing vascular problems in the brain a lot more than we're seeing risk of pure Alzheimer's. So that to keep your vascular system healthy, which means controlling your cholesterol, eating the healthy fats, okay, they're super important for your brain. So your omega-3s, your oily fish, you definitely want to eat. And make sure that you have your greens, so you methylate.
Well, that was really perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for, and fascinating. So thank you.
No,
Dr.
it's absolute
Sabine
pleasure.
Donnai,
as long as you got something from it.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on Brave New World.
No, absolute pleasure being here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Frankly, having been put under a lot of tests and exams in my time, I was really, really impressed and fascinated by the level and the depth to which these exams go, and also, more importantly, the coherence of the reporting and advice, suggestions of how to move forward. And it was particularly interesting for me to see a very, very differing advice on treating and addressing worry or anxiety, which usually is addressed through either benzodiazepines, anti-anxiolytics, or therapy, or both, and also addressing conditions that may cause them. Very rarely are they addressed through neurohormones, which of course these things are all interconnected. The external factors still play a part, the life's conditioning also plays a part, but of course all these are musical instruments that are played on by the neurohormones, and my excitatory neurohormones seem to be through the roof. So it'll be very interesting to see what will happen once these are addressed, and whether that really will have a change in how I feel on a day-to-day basis.